Look at my African American over here. Look at it.
Perhaps the most pivotal event in American history, after its independence from the British colonies, of course, was the Union victory over the Confederacy during the American Civil War. During the brutal conflict, over 620,000 soldiers were killed, and the South was all but wiped off the map. The Civil War defined America as it is today, and although it didn't fully form our modern images of a thriving, diverse America welcome to people of all races and classes of life, it nonetheless made major strides towards what we recognize today. Before the Civil War, the United States would be unrecognizable to us. It was a land in which slaves still numbered in the millions, and people were sold and treated worse than livestock. The few free African Americans lived on constant fear of being captured or mistakenly enslaved, especially after a recent strengthening of the fugitive slave laws. The entire country was heading towards war and had been growing increasingly divided for decades since the ill-fated 1820 Missouri Compromise. The disgraceful accusations of the Mexican-American War only added fuel to the fire where slavery should be allowed and where it should be prohibited. As the North and South spat at each other, Europe watched the outbreak of war with certain interest, with several gleeful for a chance to watch the destruction of U.S.-style democracy. President Abraham Lincoln realized the importance of the conflict and knew it was a test of whether his nation and the government by the people, for the people, could ever endure. And yet Lincoln was not truly the savior we envision him to be today. He was more a tormented, reluctant hero pushed into his position more so by necessity and the overwhelming tendency towards the abolishment of slavery in order to showcase America as a center of freedom throughout the world. Lincoln, of course, was morally opposed to slavery as a young man, yet he viewed it as constitutionally guaranteed and first debated whether he should free slaves back to Africa to ease racial tensions.
Professor Kate Mazur of Northwestern University, who recently concluded that Lincoln as president, quote, evidently did not take a strong stand for admitting them, that is, African Americans, to more social occasions such as public receptions and New Year's Day levees. Now, a close examination of those receptions and levees reveals that Lincoln sought to lift the racial ban, but encountered opposition from his spouse.
Although his colonization scheme would fail, Lincoln saw slavery as a military necessity by July of 1862, when the Union was suffering heavy defeats at the hands of the Confederacy, and the lingering possibility of European intervention. Freeing the slaves could sow confusion and disorder within the South and gain the affection of the French and the British, who had already outlawed slavery. In the end, the institution of slavery prevented outside intervention on the part of the Confederacy, and thus the Union won, and ever since, the United States has grown only stronger. The victory has brought together a nation that has been drifting apart since its inception, and ensured that U.S. would become the power it is today. Nationalism was greatly boosted, America boasted the largest army, and all across the world, democracy's true power has been demonstrated. Even today, however, the issues arising from improper Reconstruction-era policies in the South continue to plague the United States. White supremacists and even current political leaders feed on the racial animosities that persist from the age of Lincoln and the Civil War, unresolved even after blood has been shed. Americans are better for having undergone their birth by blood, a more tolerant and welcoming people built on a well-tested foundations. Yet it is important that we, as Americans, continue to acknowledge the men died in order to let their fellow Americans live to the rights that we were entitled to, and forgetting their sacrifices and what they fought for when assured that they died in vain.
Can you see by dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last I was in the land of God, no time there.
On March 4th, 1865, later Douglas memorably described how guards denied him entrance to the reception following Lincoln's second inauguration, how the president at once overruled the guards, and how he heartily welcomed the famed black orator and said, as you probably know, "Well, Douglas, I saw you out there in the audience as I delivered my address. What'd you think of it?" And I have this fantasy that Douglas was thinking, "Well, actually, Mr. President, you know, the biblical allusion you used was slightly misapplied, and your syntax was a little garbled there toward the end, but otherwise it was a sacred effort."